You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Now, before getting into this case, it's still very much solved. However, since Princess Diana was such a beloved figure, and continues to be today, some maintain suspicions surrounding the circumstances of her death. So today, we're going to look into some of those circumstances to see if any merit a closer look. Honestly, if I disappear under mysterious circumstances after this, you know where to look. But hear me out. I'm speaking on behalf of Batman and Robin, and I'm going to tell you right now that we don't respond well to threats. Diana had her own Beanie Baby, so I'll be watching my mouth. The Honorable Diana Frances Spencer was born in Norfolk, England on July 1st, 1961. The youngest daughter of Viscount and Viscountess Althorpe, making her a member of the British aristocracy. When her father inherited the earldom in 1975, she became Lady Diana. She attended boarding school in Kent, then finished schooling in Switzerland until 1978. Afterwards, she moved into an apartment in London with some friends and worked as a kindergarten teacher at the Young England School. Must be fun to be a young, attractive person in London. There was nothing beautiful about what happened to me in London. It's interesting that despite being an aristocrat and having wealth and a title, she was still living in an apartment with her friends and working as a kindergarten teacher in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Humble beginnings even for someone who technically had Lady in front of her name. The Spencer family had known the royal family for years, as they were neighbors in Norfolk. But Diana and her future husband, Prince Charles, didn't get to know each other until November 1977, when Diana's sister, Lady Sarah, who had dated Charles on and off, invited him for a weekend with her family. At the time, Diana was 16, Charles was 29. Now, weirdness about the age difference aside, because, yeah, it's weird, they hadn't actually done anything yet. But it is a red flag either way. Also, could you imagine dating someone and then just moving on to their sister? I don't think I could. What if you were dating someone and realized, oh wait, the sister is actually the right one? It's still a weird move, but he's a royal, so I guess he figured, yeah, whatever, I'll do what I want. Royals don't tend to worry too much about other people's feelings. Charles invited both Spencer sisters to his 30th birthday in 1978, and over time, his relationship with Diana grew. On February 24th, 1981, their engagement was announced, and 5 months later, on July 29th, 1981, the same month Diana turned 20, they got married. Before the wedding, Diana recalled only having met with Charles 13 times. Less than a year after the wedding, she gave birth to Prince William, and a little more than 2 years later, Prince Harry. Suddenly being thrust into princesshood is a lot to handle, especially for a 20-year-old with no royal experience. But the royal family was reportedly relieved to have some youth in the mix to help revitalize their stale public image. Diana, however, was adored by the public, famously earning the nickname the People's Princess from former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. She used her popularity to advocate for important causes: leprosy, domestic violence, mental health, and the AIDS crisis. Basically, she actually cared about people. By the way, I'm really glad we're past the whole leprosy thing. That's a biblical thing. Could you imagine being sent to an island just for getting sick? Honestly, the island part sounds kind of nice, but the whole skin falling off thing, not so much. Her constant display of compassion made her incredibly popular with the public, but behind closed doors, things were very different. In a 1995 interview with the BBC, Diana explained, quote, "Anything good I ever did, nobody ever said a thing. Never said, well done, or was it okay? But if I tripped up, which invariably I did, because I was new at the game, a ton of bricks came down on me." Former Guardian Royal correspondent Stephen Bates noted, quote, "There was an air of desperation about the marriage. The fact they scarcely knew each other was a big problem, because the royals were so desperate to seize this potential asset, they didn't question whether she was up to the immense pressure she was going to get." Queen Elizabeth II reportedly thought Diana would find the royal life easy because she had grown up in privilege. But that was not the case. She went from living in an apartment with her friends to Buckingham Palace practically overnight. The change was drastic and isolating. Between wedding planning and royal duties, she was left alone most of the time, and that isolation contributed to a decline in her mental health. Soon after moving into Buckingham Palace, Diana began struggling with bulimia. She later spoke openly about the disorder, explaining, quote, "You inflict it upon yourself because your self-esteem is at a low ebb, and you don't think you're worthy or valuable." Her whole situation was miserable. She was isolated and alone, which is already an issue. But add to the fact that she was under intense scrutiny every second of the day, and she had no allies within the royal family, she was completely alone. And that's the thing about eating disorders. It doesn't matter who you are or what your circumstances are, it can happen to anyone. But to the public, Diana's struggles were invisible. Everyone wanted to believe in a perfect royal love story. So they did. On her wedding day, hundreds of thousands of well-wishers lined the route from Buckingham Palace to St. Paul's Cathedral, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal couple. The Archbishop of Canterbury described the wedding as, quote, "the stuff of which fairy tales are made," which honestly feels like a bit of a reach. I mean, yeah, a prince and princess got married. Very original. The stuff of fairy tales? Really? Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Diana was suffering. And making things worse, the one person who should have been there for her, Prince Charles, was, let's just say, not the best husband. As if Diana didn't already have enough to deal with, Charles wasn't exactly the picture of a devoted husband. In fact, he was very much still in love with another woman, Camilla Parker Bowles. According to Diana's interviews with journalist Andrew Morton, Charles and Camilla had dated in the early 70s, but the royal family discouraged Charles from marrying her due to her less than sterling reputation, her lack of a family title, and the fact that she loved another man. But despite that, Charles never really let her go. When he and Diana got engaged, his relationship with Camilla was put on hold, but Camilla's influence over him remained. Before their wedding, Diana found a personalized bracelet that Charles had made for Camilla. Not great. And during their honeymoon, Charles wore cufflinks that Camilla had given him. Diana later revealed that during this time, her bulimia was worse than ever. She would make herself sick just minutes after eating. By 1986, Charles and Camilla's secret relationship was not so secret anymore. It's believed that by then, they had fully resumed their affair. Then, in 1989, things got even worse when a private phone call between Charles and Camilla was leaked to the press. In it, Charles told Camilla that he wished he, quote, lived in her knickers. British pillow talk at its worst. Could you imagine someone whispering that to you in bed? Oh, I wish I lived in your knickers. No, thank you. In 1989, Diana confronted Camilla directly. Camilla reportedly stood her ground, telling Diana, quote, "You've got everything you ever wanted. All the men in the world fall in love with you, and you got 2 beautiful children. What more do you want?" And of course, Diana iconically responded, quote, "I want my husband." Years later, in her 1995 BBC interview, Diana was asked how she coped with everything. She said she cried a lot, often using her bulimia as a way to relieve some of the pressure. She also revealed that she had been so depressed that she had at one point attempted to kill herself. Stuck in a very public yet very unhappy marriage, Diana found love elsewhere. She began a relationship with Captain James Hewitt of the Queen's Household Cavalry. By the late 80s, Diana and Charles' very obvious marital problems became public knowledge. In December 1992, the British Prime Minister announced their amicable separation. By August 1996, the divorce was finalized, and honestly, good for her. A year after divorce, Diana was on vacation in France with her new partner, Dodi Fayed, who she had met in 1986 when he was playing in a polo match against her then-husband, Prince Charles. Which, I have to say, is a fantastic way to rub it in. Imagine Charles watching his ex-wife date the guy who beat him at polo. It's gotta sting. Shortly after midnight on August 31st, 1997, Diana and Fayed, their bodyguard Trevor Reese Jones, and their daughter Henry Paul left the Ritz Hotel in Paris. The hotel was owned by Al Fayed's father, and Paul, who was also the head of security, was behind the wheel. The plan was to drive to Al Fayed's Paris estate, but while approaching the entrance to a bridge, Paul lost control of the vehicle. At the time, the car was being chased by paparazzi, who was going 70 miles an hour in a 30 miles per hour zone. the Mercedes slammed into a pillar in the center of the highway. Diana, Fiat, and Paul were not wearing seatbelts. Paul and Fiat were pronounced dead at the scene, while Diana and Rhys Jones were rushed to the hospital. The paparazzi, meanwhile, chose to photograph the wreckage instead of helping. Rhys Jones survived, but Diana's injuries were severe. She had a concussion, broken arm, a deep cut on her thigh, and massive chest injuries. Doctors operated on her for 2 hours, but they couldn't get her heart to beat properly. On the morning of August 31st, 1997, Diana passed away from internal bleeding. She was 36 years old. On September 6, 1997, 2.5 billion people, one of the largest non-sporting television audiences in history, tuned in to watch her funeral procession. In the wake of her death, as happens when the world struggles to come to terms with a tragedy, conspiracy theories began to gain traction. The Daily Express was one of the biggest pushers of these rumors, suggesting that Diana's death wasn't an accident at all, that someone had orchestrated it. In response, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Paget, an investigation into whether there was any truth to these theories. By the end, they examined 175 different conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to go through all 175, but we're going to take a look at the most popular ones. Number one theory is the driver was paid to crash the car. One of the most prevalent conspiracy theories is that Henry Paul, the driver of the car on the night of Diana's death, was working for security services, either British or French, and was paid to crash the vehicle on purpose. So why do people believe this theory? Well, Henry Paul was the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel, making approximately $35,000 per year. However, at the time of his death, Paul had nearly $250,000 in his bank account, far more than what he should have been able to accumulate on his salary. Additionally, he was carrying a significant amount of cash on his person that night. Conspiracy theorists argued that this money was a payoff from intelligence agencies for his role in the assassination plot. And some have suggested that Paul had connections to MI6, the British intelligence, and that he was recruited to help orchestrate the crash. Mohammed Fayed, Dodi Fayed's father, had publicly insisted that Paul was on MI6's payroll and taking orders from the British government. Supporters of this theory point to documents alleging that MI6 had been monitoring Diana and had a file on her. And also, you have to look at his blood alcohol level. The official story is that Paul was highly intoxicated at the time of the crash, 3 times the legal limit. However, some witnesses who saw Paul that evening claimed he was not visibly drunk, leading to some to suspect that the toxicology reports were falsified to make him look negligent. Some even claim his body was swapped with that of a drunk person to cover up the true cause of the accident. Now, there's been some counter-arguments and evidence against it. Paul's toxicology reports were verified. Multiple independent forensic experts reviewed the toxicology reports, confirming that Paul's blood alcohol level was indeed 3 times over the legal limit. Traces of antidepressants and anti-alcoholism drugs were also found in his system, which could have further impaired his ability to drive. If Paul were truly part of an assassination plot, why would he willingly make himself more likely to die in a high-speed crash? And of course, number 2, there's no proof that the money was a bribe. Paul did have a lot of money in his account, but it was never proven to be from intelligence agencies. He was known, though, to invest in stocks and had been paid well under the table by wealthy guests at the Ritz for special favors, including arranging transportation. While suspicious, his finances alone aren't solid proof of a murder plot. And then you have the survivor's account. Trevor Rhys Jones, the bodyguard and sole survivor of the crash, never reported anything suspicious about Paul's behavior that night. If Paul were planning to crash the car, why would he put himself in the vehicle as well? So, our final verdict: while Paul's financial situation is unusual, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that he was intoxicated and just lost control of the car rather than being a willing participant in a murder plot. And Theory number 2, Diana was killed because she was pregnant. Another theory, heavily promoted by Mohammed al-Fayed, is that Diana was pregnant with Dodi Fayed's child, and the British royal family could not allow the future king's mother to have a child with a Muslim man. So why do people believe this theory? Well, allegedly Diana told friends about a, quote, big surprise. Weeks before her death, Diana was heard mentioning that she had a big surprise to share soon. Some believe this was a reference to her pregnancy, though no direct confirmation exists. And then you have the claims coming from Mohammed Fayed. Fayed had long insisted that the royal family could not allow an Egyptian Muslim man become the stepfather of a future king. And so he believes the monarchy ordered MI6 to assassinate Diana to prevent a scandal. And third, there were reports that Diana and Dodi were about to get engaged. Some claim Dodi had purchased an engagement ring for Diana and was planning to propose. If true, this could have made the royal family panic, fearing a long-term connection to Dodi and his family. But there have been, like the previous theory, some counter-arguments and evidence against this theory. Diana's post-mortem exam shows she wasn't pregnant. A full autopsy and toxicology report confirmed that Diana was not pregnant at the time of her death, and there were no signs of early pregnancy in her blood samples. And of course, secondly, she was using contraception. Close friends of Diana confirmed that she was on birth control at the time, and there's no record of her telling anyone that she was expecting a child. And of course, the engagement ring theory is pretty weak. Dodi had purchased a ring from a high-end jewelry store, but there's no proof it was an engagement ring. Diana's friend have said she was not planning to marry Dodi, and there's no evidence she had accepted a proposal. So our verdict for this one, the claim that Diana was pregnant falls apart under scrutiny. Her autopsy confirmed she was not pregnant, and she was taking birth control. The racism of the royal family is well documented, so it's understandable why people would believe they wanted her out of the picture. However, the pregnancy theory itself lacks actual evidence. And then we have theory number 3, which was Diana's medical care was sabotaged. Some believe that Diana could have survived her injuries, but emergency responders intentionally delayed getting her to the hospital. So why do people believe this? Well, one, she was treated at the scene instead of being rushed to a hospital. In the UK, the medical protocol is to rush critically injured patients to the hospital as fast as possible. In France, the protocol is different. Emergency responders treat victims on site before transporting them. Conspiracy theorists argue that this delay cost Diana her life on purpose. Number 2, some doctors believe she could have been saved. Some have speculated that if she had reached the hospital earlier, she might have survived. And like all the other theories, there are some counter-arguments and strong evidence against it. Her injuries were likely fatal no matter what. Britain's top forensic pathologist, Dr. Richard Shepherd, has stated that Diana suffered a very rare tear in a vein in her lung, which caused fatal internal bleeding. He noted that even with the fastest treatment, it was highly unlikely she could have been saved. The French medical system's approach is not a conspiracy. French emergency responders always treat victims at the scene before transporting them. This is their standard approach, not sabotage. So our final verdict, while the delay in getting Diana to the hospital might seem suspicious, her injuries were almost certainly fatal regardless. And then we get to theory number 4. Diana predicted her own death. One of the most haunting conspiracy theories surrounding Diana's death is the idea that she saw it coming. 10 months before the fatal crash, she reportedly wrote a letter predicting exactly how she would die. The letter, given to her former butler Paul Burrell for safekeeping, stated, quote, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. Redacted is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry." This is chilling for a few reasons. First, she specifically mentions an accident involving her car, which is precisely how she ended up dying. Second, she suggests, that someone was actively planning this event to ensure that Prince Charles would be free to remarry. 7 years later, Charles did, in fact, marry Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman he had reportedly been in love with all along. Naturally, this letter has fueled speculation that Diana's death was not an accident, but a carefully orchestrated assassination. If she knew she was in danger, it suggests that she had reason to believe someone wanted her gone. But how much weight does this letter actually hold? So let's break it down. Diana reportedly wrote the letter in October 1996, shortly after her divorce from Charles, which was finalized in August of that year. This was a particularly tumultuous time in her life. She had been cast out of the royal family, receiving constant media scrutiny, and was deeply paranoid about being monitored. According to those close to her, Diana was convinced that there were people within the establishment who wanted her dead. Paul Burrell, the butler who kept the letter, later said, quote, "She was constantly looking over her shoulder, worried about her safety. She believed the palace saw her as a problem that needed to be handled." There are also reports that Diana had expressed fears about her car being tampered with before. In Diana, Her True Story, biographer Andrew Morton wrote that Diana once told friends, quote, "I'm sure they'll do something to my brakes." If these accounts are to be believed, then Diana had long suspected that she could be the target of a fatal car crash. The fact that she eventually died in one certainly makes this theory compelling. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding this letter is who Diana was accusing. The name of the person she suspected was redacted before the letter was made public, which of course naturally raises some questions. Many assume she was referring to Prince Charles, given the way she worded her prediction, quote, "make the path clear for Charles to marry." But others believe she may have been referring to MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service, or even Queen Elizabeth herself. Of course, if the royal family was involved in a plot to kill her, they would have an obvious motive. Diana was no longer part of the monarchy, but she was still widely popular. Perhaps even more popular than the royals themselves. She had also started dating Dodi Fayed, an Egyptian Muslim man, which reportedly made the establishment uneasy. So was this redacted name a high-ranking royal, a government official, someone with the power to make her disappear? We don't know. But the fact that her fears were so specific and were later partially validated by real events is unsettling. So, you gotta also ask, was this just paranoia? Of course, there are many who argue that Diana's prediction was simply the result of stress and paranoia. She had been through a bitter divorce. She was under media scrutiny. She was receiving threatening letters and calls, and she had been openly critical of the royal family. It's entirely possible that her fears were more psychological than based on actual threats. Additionally, while her letter eerily resembles what happened to her, it wasn't exactly accurate. She died in a car crash, but her brakes didn't fail. She sustained a serious head injury, but that wasn't the cause of the crash itself. And there's no solid evidence that anyone tampered with the car. In other words, while the letter may seem prophetic, it doesn't perfectly match the events of her death. So, after examining 175 theories, Operation Paget concluded that none had any basis in reality. Diana's death was ultimately a tragic accident, but her legacy as a people's princess lives on. Now, let me know your thoughts on these theories and what you think really happened to Princess Diana in the comment section below. Give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the bell notification button to be notified of our next episode. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/CTC podcast. With that, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.